Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to talk about another heartbreaking case. It's the story of a young mother who never imagined her husband would take her life. This case shows how powerful manipulation can be. It's when someone changes another person's thoughts or actions for their own benefit. Manipulators use lies, threats, and even emotional or physical abuse to get what they want. Sometimes, their tricks are so subtle that the victim doesn't realize they're being controlled. This happens often when the victim is in love and fully trusts the manipulator. This is what happened to Maria Fernanda Quesada, a victim of femicide, a crime where a man kills a woman. In this case, her murder was something people around her feared. They knew it was just a matter of time. Maria was scared of her abusive husband, but her love for him and their children made her stay. She wanted to keep the family together. Unfortunately, she gave in to his manipulation. She trusted him completely, even when he invited her to what became their final meeting. Now, let's go back to her early life. Maria Fernanda Quesada was born on June 18, 1994, in La Garita, a small town in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. Maria was an only child, a true miracle for her parents, the Quesadas. After years of struggling with infertility and hearing doctors say it was impossible, Maria's mother managed to get pregnant and give birth to a healthy baby girl. Her parents adored her and made it their mission to protect her from harm and provide everything she needed. From a young age, Maria dreamed of having a big family with lots of siblings. But her mother's health didn't allow for more children, so Maria grew up as an only child. Determined to create her own large, happy family one day, Maria set her sights on having at least 3 children. Her parents worked hard, and by the standards of their province, they were doing well. They focused on giving Maria the best education possible, helping her grow her skills and talent. The family lived in a comfortable home, and Maria had the chance to study music and attend art classes. She was close with her family, but her bond with her aunt, her mom's younger sister, was special, since the aunt was only 6 years older than Maria. They grew up like best friends, always sharing secrets and spending time together. Maria was a bright student with a love for creativity. She was passionate about painting and sculpture, and those who knew her described her as kind, friendly, and empathetic. She easily made friends, was always there for others, and had a naturally attractive personality. At 18, Maria began dating a boy she'd known since school. The relationship moved fast, and Maria thought he was dependable and loving, but things changed when she found out she was pregnant. The boy, who was the same age, wasn't ready to be a father. He suggested she end the pregnancy, and when she refused, he ended the relationship. Maria was heartbroken, but still hoped that after the baby was born, he would come back. Sadly, by then, he had already moved on with someone else and didn't want anything to do with the child he had fathered. Through all of this, Maria's main support came from her parents and her aunt, who helped her both emotionally and financially as she raised her son. Maria knew she couldn't depend on her family forever and needed to find a way to support her son on her own. She wanted to do something she enjoyed, so she started looking for opportunities. It wasn't long before she came across online lessons on making soap and decorative candles. Her creative nature immediately drew her to the idea, and she saw real potential in it. Excited, Maria threw herself into crafting handmade candles and soaps, selling them through social media. She set up online groups to advertise her products and took custom orders, making unique items based on her customers' preferences. Her business started to grow quickly. Her online following increased, and so did the number of orders. She constantly worked to improve her skills, aiming to become a top-level artisan, and dreamed of one day opening her own shop. Alongside her business, Maria also started teaching online soap-making classes, which provided her with a stable income. She continued living with her parents and son, saving money to buy her own home and dreaming of getting an education. Though busy with work, Maria still hoped to find a good man to build a happy family with, someone who would accept and love her son. Her family shared this hope, but when she introduced them to her new partner, they felt uneasy and worried for her. In the fall of 2017, Maria went to the city to buy supplies for her candle and soap business. While shopping, she met a man named Esteban Ravira Vargas. He approached her, complimenting her beauty and saying he couldn't resist introducing himself. Esteban was charming and polite, quickly winning Maria over. They ended up walking together and having coffee, and after a short chat, Maria gave him her phone number. This marked the start of their unexpected romance. Despite the 12-year age gap between them, Maria didn't see it as a problem and fell for him almost immediately. However, her friends and family were baffled by her attraction to him. Esteban was the complete opposite of Maria. He was rough, used foul language, and had many bad habits. He also kept his past a secret, and although he didn't have a job, he had a lot of money, which people suspected he got through dishonest means. Esteban owned a gun, which he kept in the glove compartment of his old pickup truck. He rarely parted with it, but never explained why. Maria had her suspicions that he might be involved in criminal activities, but she was too afraid to ask. She also knew nothing about his previous relationships. After about 4 months of dating, Maria decided to introduce Esteban to her family. She was nervous about how her parents would react, and it turned out her fears were justified. Esteban was rude, used foul language, and reacted angrily to any questions or comments. His behavior was aggressive, and he openly frightened Maria's parents. As soon as he left, they urged her to end the relationship, fearing for her safety. But Maria was deeply in love and completely blinded by her feelings. She refused to listen to their concerns, convinced that with enough love and care, she could help him control his temper. She believed he would eventually calm down, become a good husband, and a loving father to her son and the children she dreamed of having with him. A couple of weeks later, Esteban invited Maria to meet his family. He took her to a dinner at his mother's house, but the experience was a nightmare for Maria. Esteban's family was just as hot-tempered and aggressive as he was. They spoke loudly, used foul language, and seemed ready to argue at any moment. They treated Maria with disdain, making hurtful comments and comparing her to his ex-girlfriends. They didn't like that Maria already had a child from a previous relationship, and they didn't hide their disapproval. Maria struggled to hold back her tears as she felt humiliated. To make matters worse, Esteban's relatives drank heavily, becoming even more aggressive and unpredictable when intoxicated. Maria found his family cruel and mean-spirited, and she confided in her parents about how upset she was. Once again, her parents begged her to leave Esteban and stay away from him and his family. But Maria, still believing things would eventually improve, refused to let go. Despite everything, Esteban tried to behave when Maria was around. A nightmare marriage. In December 2018, Maria found out she was expecting Esteban's child. Though Esteban wasn't overly excited, he agreed it was time to make their relationship official. They got married on April 6, 2019, with Maria 4 months pregnant. Their wedding was beautiful, a white dress, a beachside ceremony. Afterward, they moved into a small house owned by Esteban. But from the very beginning, Esteban showed his true self. His outbursts of anger were constant, and he didn't hold back. He threw fits over minor things and even used violence. Insults, beatings, and humiliation became the norm in their household, and Maria's 5-year-old son witnessed it all. For months, Maria endured this in silence, hiding everything from her family. She avoided visiting her parents to keep them from seeing her bruises. She wore long sleeves, even in the heat, and used makeup to cover the marks on her face, hoping the neighbors wouldn't notice. But as her pregnancy progressed, Maria began to worry more about the safety of her unborn child and the impact this abuse would have on her older son. She convinced herself that once the baby was born, Esteban would change and become a caring father, so she put up with the daily abuse, accusations, and insults. Esteban manipulated her emotions, reminding her that he had accepted her with a child that no one else wanted. He knew exactly how to control her. Maria was terrified of being left alone with 2 children, and Esteban used this fear to keep her from leaving. However, shortly before the baby was born, after one particularly brutal beating, Maria finally had enough. She packed her things, took her son, and fled to her parents' house. Her parents were horrified when they saw her. She was covered in bruises, and they immediately urged her to go to the police, but Maria refused. A caring father. In the last few weeks before the baby was born, Maria stayed with her parents. Even then, she held out hope that the birth of her child would change things. She didn't want to file for divorce, despite her family's pleas to end the marriage. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a baby boy. She called Esteban to tell him the news. Within 15 minutes, he rushed to the hospital, looking happy but confused. He dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness and pleading with Maria to come back. He promised that everything would change now. Maria believed Esteban's promises and went back home with her children after being discharged from the hospital. Her parents were shocked by her decision. They saw through Esteban's act and knew it was just manipulation. but Maria refused to listen. The situation led to a heated argument, and Maria made it clear that if forced to choose, she would choose Esteban, not wanting to damage their relationship with their only daughter or lose the chance to see their grandchildren. Maria's parents reluctantly accepted her decision. For the first few months, Esteban seemed like a changed man. He spent most of his time with Maria and their newborn son, helping out around the house and showing care. However, he remained distant from Maria's older son. Though Esteban didn't mistreat the boy, it was clear he felt uncomfortable interacting with him despite trying to hide it. Esteban also got a job, and for a while it looked like he was doing everything to provide for his family. Maria was overjoyed, feeling like her dream of a happy family life was finally coming true. Her relatives, who had been skeptical of Esteban, even started to believe that he had truly changed. Living with a monster, this peaceful period lasted exactly 1 year. Shortly after their son's first birthday, Esteban's anger, which he had kept under control, erupted. He turned their home into a nightmare. He brutally attacked Maria, breaking several of her ribs and nearly blinding her in one eye. Terrified, Maria fled to her parents' house. Once again, they begged her to go to the police, but she refused. A few days later, Esteban came, apologized, and asked her to come back home. To everyone's disbelief, Maria agreed, insisting that she still believed in him and hoped they could regain their happiness. In the following months, Maria ended up in the hospital multiple times with serious injuries. She always blamed her condition on accidents, refusing to involve the police. Neighbors often heard loud arguments and the sounds of violence from their house, and some even witnessed Esteban attacking Maria. But whenever anyone offered help, Maria begged them not to call the authorities. The community was terrified of Esteban. They didn't know what he was capable of and feared that confronting him could lead to more violence. The situation finally reached its breaking point in November 2021. Maria, now fearing for her life and the safety of her sons, contacted the police. Maria could no longer endure living under the same roof as a violent and manipulative man. She moved back into her parents' home with her children. She managed to secure a restraining order against Esteban, barring him from approaching her or their children. The injuries she sustained were documented by doctors who recorded multiple bruises, contusions, and abrasions in various stages of healing, evidence of the systematic abuse she endured. Neighbors and relatives confirmed that Esteban regularly beat his wife and threatened her. As a result, the court forbade him from contacting her or their son without her consent. However, this didn't stop Esteban. He continued to show up at Maria's parents' house, waiting for her to come outside. Whenever he saw her, he tried to convince her to talk. Maria, terrified, would immediately retreat into the house. Eventually, she only left the house with her relatives for protection, fearing an attack from him. A brutal attack and child abduction. Maria quickly filed for divorce, setting the stage for a contentious battle over their assets and custody of their son. She also pursued a domestic violence case, backed by medical reports and witness testimonies from her family and neighbors, hoping it would grant her sole custody of the child. But Esteban had his own plans. On March 3, 2022, despite the court order, Esteban showed up at Maria's parents' house. He appeared calm, polite, and insisted on speaking with Maria. Her parents tried to turn him away, but he was persistent. A few minutes later, Maria herself came to the door and agreed to talk. Esteban was convincing, and after a brief conversation, Maria agreed to go with him to their shared home to resolve some issues. Against her parents' warnings, she even took their son, as Esteban claimed he missed the boy and wanted to spend time with him. Her parents were deeply concerned and pleaded with her not to go, but Maria assured them that everything would be fine. She took the child, got into Esteban's car, and that was the last time her parents saw her alive. The couple argued on the way to the house. By the time they arrived, Esteban was shouting and using foul language as overheard by the neighbors. Inside the house, the situation spiraled, the shouting intensified, and soon there were sounds of crashes, as if furniture and dishes were being smashed. Then came the sound of a child crying, followed by Maria's desperate plea for help. Neighbors immediately called emergency services, and one man who lived across the street rushed over to assist. As he neared the house, the front door burst open, and Esteban appeared covered in blood. In one hand, he clutched the crying child, and in the other, a blood-soaked knife. Esteban's eyes were wild, his face contorted with rage. The neighbor, terrified for the boy's safety, retreated as Vargas jumped into his car and sped away. When police arrived, they found a horrific scene. Maria lay lifeless in the kitchen, her body mutilated and surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been brutally attacked with blood splattered across the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling, testimony to the savagery of the assault. Forensic experts counted 11 stab wounds, mostly concentrated on her upper torso and hands, which she had used to defend herself. It appeared that Esteban had ambushed her, evidenced by the 3 stab wounds to her neck and shoulders from behind. Maria likely attempted to flee, but her husband caught her, continuing the violent assault with stabs to her chest, head, and hands. Her body was found on its back, with the final, fatal wounds delivered near her heart. There was no doubt about the identity of Maria's killer, but where was Esteban, and more importantly, where was the child? Hours later, authorities discovered Esteban's abandoned car on a remote road. Inside, they found traces of blood and the knife used in the crime, still bearing his fingerprints. Esteban likely ditched the car, knowing it had been flagged by police. Given his blood-stained clothes, it seemed improbable he would hitchhike or take public transport without arousing suspicion. Investigators suspected he may have stolen another vehicle to continue his escape, with the belief that Esteban was attempting to flee to Nicaragua with the child. An urgent manhunt was initiated. Alerts with photos of Esteban and his son were sent to border checkpoints. By that evening, authorities apprehended the fugitive before he could cross the border, rescuing the boy and ending the tragic ordeal. The criminal had managed to find a clean shirt, but there were still bloodstains from the victim on his jeans and sneakers. He tried to escape the country in a stolen car with his young son, but he was caught at passport control. He didn't resist and immediately asked for a lawyer. A gun that belonged to Esteban, with his fingerprints on it, was found in the stolen car. The crime was initially labeled as femicide, a severe crime against a woman due to her gender, which is heavily punished in Latin American countries, often with life imprisonment. A bloody knife with his fingerprints, bloodstains on his clothes, and neighbors who confirmed that besides him, Maria, and the child, no one else was in the house. Additionally, the investigation revealed that Esteban had a history of assaults and causing bodily harm. The only eyewitness to the crime was a 2.5-year-old boy. So Esteban and his lawyers came up with a strategy. Esteban claimed that Maria attacked him and he was only defending himself, grabbing the knife in a panic. He said he didn't remember how the wounds were inflicted and only realized what happened when Maria fell silent. Meanwhile, the Vargas family tried to damage Maria's reputation, calling her a bad mother, a terrible wife, a troublemaker, and unfaithful. They claim Maria provoked Esteban, which led to the tragedy, and tried to make Esteban seem like a victim of circumstances. The lawyers argued that the greedy Quesada family wanted to take all his property and keep him from seeing his son. During the investigation, it was even necessary to exhume Maria's body, which had been buried a week after the crime. Independent experts disproved Esteban's and his defense's claims that Maria had attacked him first, confirming that the first 3 blows were dealt from behind. The trial for Esteban started in March 2023, giving him and his lawyers plenty of time to prepare a defense. Activist organizations fighting for women's rights supported the Quesada family throughout the process. Crowds gathered, calling for justice for the criminal. The deceased's oldest son, who was 9 at the time, testified in court about the cruel treatment his stepfather showed his mother. The younger child, who was only 2.5 years old at the time of the crime, had witnessed it. Psychologists worked with the younger child and found that he was deeply scared of kitchen knives, crying out, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. The child mentioned that his father had hurt his mother and that everything turned red. These details were given to the court, but the child wasn't brought into the courtroom to avoid causing him more trauma. Many witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and friends, testified against Esteban, recalling his aggression towards his wife over time. Numerous people had seen bruises on the young woman's body, and just before the divorce proceedings began, the police had noted signs of beatings. On May 15, 2023, Esteban Ravira Vargas was found guilty of intentionally killing his wife and was sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison. The deceased woman's 2 children were given to her relatives for custody. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. There are more shocking stories to come.